Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get reined in. The sign of a great conference is the louder it gets, the longer it goes on. And so this is actually a great sign. My co-organizer, Jen, reminded me we were supposed to start at 2:15, so I'm already derelict in my duties here. We will make time. There will be time. We are happy to have our third panel of the afternoon, and it will be chaired by James Thomas, and I will not take more time, and you'll get us going. And this is Diet Coke, it's not wine. I've been asked a couple times.
Whoa. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This afternoon, we're going to, our next panel is Psychosocial Studies in the Archive. We've got Claudia Eppert, Sarah Matthews, and Sharon Slawinski will be taking us through some discussions. Claudia's considering histories of species loss in Canada. Sarah's going to lead us through thoughts about where is the atomic now, and how can the archive orient us to its persistent trace? And finally, Sharon invites us into her reflections on and preparation of a correspondence with Deborah Britzman. Okay, next up, we've got Sarah Matthews. She's Associate Professor in the Department of Communication and Cultural Studies at Wilfrid Laurier University.
You can read the next thing if you want.
What's that? Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I will continue. Situated in the field of critical security studies, her projects explore the relations between visual culture and martial politics, as well as how communities craft creative modes of relationality and survival in response to practices of state securitization. Please welcome Sarah.
Thank you. I'm going to use the whiteboard because Patty Lather's very cheeky, so I'm going to take a page from her book. And I'm going to put two things on here that have come up over and over again over the last couple of days. Oh, speak into the mic because we're being recorded. Is that it?
No, because we can't hear.
Oh, you can't hear me. Okay. What is the work of a question? How many people recognize this question? If you recognize it, then you are an aging graduate student like me. But this is one of the main things I want to talk about in my paper. And the second is another thing that's come up over, meltdowns. Right, we've had meltdowns in the last couple days come up in a number of different papers, and thank you, Deborah, for that word yesterday, because I went home and rewrote some pieces of my paper, and I felt like, oh, this is how it all hangs together. And questions are something that I feel like Deborah has given us, including asking questions about questions. So for me, with this paper, I'm really asking questions about the archive and questions about the atomic archive, which I think is a very weird archive, and I'm still trying to figure out how to think about it and think with it. Deborah used to write weird questions in the margins of our papers that we would give to her. And it's something that's actually really stuck with me all through the years. And I give, I think, some strange questions to my students, but they are provocations. So when I was working with Deborah's latest book, I was paying close attention to the kinds of questions she was asking and trying to bring some of those questions to my thinking of the archive. So, 2 invitations arrived in my mailbox around the same time in October last year. One was a query from the organizers of this wonderful celebration, an engagement with Professor Britzman's contributions to the field of psychosocial studies. The invitation proposed a compelling idea. It was a question about how to engage the archive through the problem of what it can mean to change the world from the inside out by questioning how and why people come to know and transform their worlds. questions, right? Not a 5-minute provocation, but equally difficult. I had to read it several times to try and figure out, wow, what am I going to talk about? So in my interpretation, I think the prompt orients the archive as a holding mechanism, emerging from an encounter between inside and outside, but also a method for following the twists and turns of what is both remembered and forgotten as we become selves in relation with others. In her most recent book, When History Returns, Psychoanalytic Quest for Humane Learning, Brisman suggests we might consider the archive as a history of emotional inheritances that press upon us as we make sense through the world. The catch is to navigate these insistences knowing we are affected, yet not fully understanding how. Neither can we anticipate the futures these inheritances foretell. And as I said yesterday, while listening to Deborah's elaboration of what is at stake in this work, I was struck by her question, what is it to be in a room with meltdowns without making it worse? The analysis may create the conditions for the analysand to refuse the clamor of the meltdown long enough for thinking to emerge. But what happens when the room is the crucible of war and the meltdown is the atom bomb? Put differently, how can we learn to be in the world with nuclear weapons technology and not make it worse? This is a serious question for students of war and conflict. Part 1, Atomic Archives. I've been thinking about this dilemma in the context of my work that explores how histories of civil militarization predicate the violent conflicts undertaken in the name of the sovereign. So I'm talking about international wars, but also brutal defenses as a state politics of liberal subjectivity, mutually assured destruction, the right to defend oneself, the war on terror, the war on drugs, the war on crime, and so on. For the past few years, this work has led me to an examination of nuclear remains as a social and psychic sedimentation of nation building in late modern warfare. My field sites have included abandoned Cold War bunkers, the material evidence of weapons testing, infrastructures of nuclear remediation, and archives of atomic history and atomic culture. My recent project is a collaboration with Canadian visual artist Mary Kavanagh called Trinity Returns. I promise we didn't take that title from you. But a nice parallel. The project investigates the persistence of atomic time in 2 registers, as a durational aesthetic inquiry and as a commentary on atomic tourism and how meaning is made in the afterlife of the atom bomb. This leads me to the second invitation that arrived last October, an email from Mary extending the opportunity to gain access as foreign nationals to White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. After a year of planning, we finally were able to make the trip last month. So this is really new research and thinking for me. The largest military installation in the United States, White Sands occupies almost 8,300 square kilometers of the Tularosa Basin in the Chihuahuan Desert. Once a high arid grassland settled by Nuevo Mexicano ranchers who herded the horses and cattle abandoned after the rush for gold that violently displaced the Apache communities living there. The desert continues to shapeshift in response to human mediation. It takes a full day to drive around the perimeter of the missile range. So that's an area larger than the entire GTA. From ground space to infinity, the militarized zone reaches everywhere. What travels on and through the air doesn't believe in borders. The dune fields of White Sands National Park a park within a missile range, consists of pure white gypsum silicate as far as the eye can see. People go with their families and rent crazy carpets to slide down the dunes, barbecue their lunches under aluminum shelters rising like the wings of strange birds from the salt pans. The laughter of people having a good time intermingles with the constant drone of military jets, heard but not seen. There's no outside to the militarization in this place. Is this the atomic archive? White Sands touts itself as an economic asset for the US military, as well as for commercial and international users who, for a fee, can access the land and its facilities to test their experimental weapons, including rockets, missiles, shock and vibration trials, counter IEDs, directed energy systems, and so on. The first test at this then secret military site was probably the one that you all know about. On July 16, 1945, a plutonium implosion device codenamed Trinity was detonated over the New Mexico desert. Just 2 weeks after the experimental test of the gadget, 2 atomic devices were detonated over the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 200,000 people and resulting in the deaths of thousands more from the slow violence of radiation. 79 years and over 42,000 rocket and missile tests later, the landscape of New Mexico, its infrastructures, plant life, animals, air, water, and people keep absorbing the afterlives of nuclear weapons technologies. How to make sense of these kinds of numbers, and I know, Claudia, you were talking about this with your presentation. They are measured in blast zones and fallout patterns and wind speeds and the cancer rates of downwinders and the persistence of the daughters of uranium mined by Dene workers at the El Dorado mine in the Northwest Territories and by Congolese workers at the Shinkolobwe mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo, all of whom were exposed to uranium with no protections or warnings while they loaded the materials for transport to cities like Chalk River, Ontario, and Staten Island, New York, where workers produced the plutonium for the scientists of the Manhattan Project to make their secret experiments. And in hospitals and clinics across the United States, unsuspecting patients were intentionally and secretly contaminated with plutonium or other radioactive mixtures without informed consent, at the direction of the medical staff associated with the Manhattan Project. Uranium isotopes used for atomic explosions break down into shorter-lived decay products known as daughters, some of which persist for thousands of years. The familial legacies of nuclear science make much of these patrilineages. On the successful outcome of the Trinity test, for example, the secret code to relay to President Truman was "the baby is born." The second device destined for Hiroshima was named Little Boy. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, commemorated as a modern-day Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods, is cast in the lead. This, too, is the atomic archive, science in progress as messianic myth and death drive. But between the fathers of atomic science and the daughters of uranium, the doomsday clock keeps time, tracing atomic threat as a psychic sedimentation of nation building. So where is the atomic now? And how can the archive orient us to its persistent trace? Wayfinding in White Sands Missile Range gives notice for navigating at the space, but also acts as a residue or cipher for understanding what happened, happens, what might happen here. Road signs mark where to look, but don't foretell understanding, what might be known or not known about the place marked Trinity. Take, for example, the road sign on the left. The gemsbok, or South African oryx, is a large antelope that now lives in southern New Mexico exclusively on the missile range. To increase large game opportunities for hunters, which is a big part of the New Mexican state economy, the Department of Game and Fish imported 95 oryx between 1969 and 1977. There are now thousands of oryx on the missile range. their population kept in check by big game hunters who cast their luck into the state lottery for an annual tag. Nuclear colonialism is the shadow of the atomic archive. Part 2, interpreting the atomic archive. Britzman asks us to greet the interruptions of history's return with a posture of curiosity, to make interest in how repetitions of argument and encounter rise up in relations with others. Returns, she suggests, are, quote, paradoxical. Their reception an emotional situation made from a strange mixture of timelines of transference understandings. Oops. Not as something passed down through the ages, I missed the beginning of that quote. Quote, not as something passed down through the ages, but as more unstable in address and meaning, end quote. The archive both contains and returns this instability as material for learning how to live. How to interpret the instability involves the capacity to stay, in Britzman's reading of Sedgwick, with, quote, the middle ranges of agency, as features of discovery instead of splitting into good and bad that lend havoc to the violent and omnipotent demand for all or nothing, end quote. Here we are again with the meltdown in the room and the question of how not to make it worse. The story of atomic science is full of split objects, good and bad. Much is made of Einstein and Oppenheimer's disenchantment with the militarization of their science and their eventual split from the state project of nuclear development. Since 1947, the rebellious Manhattan Project scientists and now engineers and physicists from around the world meet to assess the world's vulnerability to global catastrophes such as nuclear war and climate change. The doomsday clock, which is this apparatus that looks like you might have made it for your high school poster project, was created by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and adapts the imagery of apocalypse, the midnight, and nuclear explosion, countdown to zero, to convey the threat of orchestrated disaster. The terrifying thing about a meltdown is not knowing what is on the other side. Part 3, on not starting with the splitting of the atom. Contemporary nuclear criticism often represents the so-called discovery of atomic science as exceptionalism. There was before the atomic bomb and after, the birth of a modern atomic age. But what if the atomic archive doesn't start and end with the bomb in the landscape? The visual spectacle of the bomb, what theorist Joseph Masco calls its dazzle, simultaneously obscures militarized violence while presenting it as an external spectacle. In his 1984 essay, No Apocalypse, Not Now, Full Speed Ahead, 7 Missiles, 7 Missives, Derrida warns of the dazzle of nuclear criticism itself, suggesting that there is, quote, perhaps no invention, no radically new predicate in the situation known as the nuclear age. Of all the dimensions of such an age, we may always say one thing: it is neither the first time nor the last. In this view, the discovery of the splitting of the atom is a residue along the timeline of white liberal subjectivity as the right to violence everywhere in the name of defense. What special reading and writing attitude, Britzman queries, might attention to the residues require? Could this be a method for interpreting and narrating the atomic archive? In the last chapter of her book, Britzman writes about reservations. Reservations about writing, about how one's topic might be conveyed and received, but also about the emotional inheritances that haunt the work of writing itself. A method, she emerges, by asking what is missing and by bringing attention to the day's residues, the things left behind as life goes about. And I've got just enough time to share one from my exploration of the atomic archive. It's a strange archive, like I said. While performing criticality tests at Los Alamos National Lab in May 1946, Canadian physicist Louis Slotin accidentally triggered a fission reaction, releasing ionizing radiation, which resulted in his poisoning and eventual death. Physicist Al Graves was standing next to Slotin when the reaction occurred, and while he survived his dose of radiation, these gold dentures were crafted to protect his mouth from his own irradiated fillings. The set of gold dentures is on display in the Historical Museum of the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, right next to a sample of graphite like the one used in the first nuclear reaction. Residues from the life of atomic science that bring the museum visitor close to its deaths. What to make of the things left behind from the atomic archive. Close attention to what is forgotten from the dazzle of the blast, the discarded content and disavowed histories that must be fought for. An affected understanding that can also withstand the meltdowns of affect. Perhaps the middle ranges of agency can divide the story of atomic science and as omniscience and encounter the meltdown in the room beyond the terrible bargain of mutually assured destruction.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we've got our final panelist for this round. Sharon Slawinski is Professor of Information and Media Studies at Western University and creator of the Museum of Dreams. She's written extensively on photography, human rights, and the social imaginary. Her latest book, An Alphabet of Dreamers, How to See the World with Closed Eyes, will be published later this year. Next year. Please welcome Sharon.
Good afternoon. This is an intimidating crowd. Deborah, I've known you half my life, and now I am the age that you were when we met all those years ago. A quarter of a century's passed since our first meeting at this very university. I've been meaning to send you a letter. You know, you often come out of a page I'm reading, and sometimes you come out of a page I'm trying to write. In these visions, you're usually sitting in your oversized chair, sometimes with a cigar in one hand, sometimes you're shaking your index finger at me. But in all these variations, there is laughter. I suspect I'm not the only one that you visit in this way. You are the Nebenmensch for many of us, the fellow human being who is nearby, responding with warmth, serving as a character to our thinking. To tell you the truth, I've been trying to write for a long time, ever since you asked that provocative question all those years ago. How does the dream work become a paradigm for knowledge? Please forgive my extremely belated reply. The question sent me on many detours, as all good questions do, but I think I finally have an answer, or at least a response to your query. My journey was wide and eclectic, and of course it involved Dr. Freud's work, although over time I've grown less enthusiastic about his method of interpreting dreams, his hermeneutics of suspicion, and more interested in the special form of attention that these visions seem to demand. Dreams implicitly teach us to pay attention to the theater of the mind, and I've come to believe that it was this implicit demand that inspired the doctor's unique method of listening, his freely floating attention. And I was going to ask the Gleichschweben auf, how do you say in German? Freely floating attention. Susanna. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, freely floating. Evenly hovering, I think sometimes translated as. I suspect you agree, Britzman, because your latest book opens with a conspicuous return to this question. As we heard last night, Freud wrote 8 prefaces to the interpretation of dreams over 30 years. And you go on to say that this grounds the value of psychoanalytic discovery in the fundamental situation of the dream. Those of us that know you will recognize one of your favorite words here, situation. You've written of analytic situations, ethical situations, reading situations, and of course, the emotional situation of the baby. And now, in this latest book, the situation of the dream. I found my own way to this idea, although my route took me through rather different terrain. I was following Frantz Fanon's tracks. The radical psychiatrist also brings his readers to the situation of the dream, or as he would say, la sociogénie. As you know, Fanon spent the entirety of his relatively short career fighting the colonizing force of his profession. And his attempt to intervene upon this violence played out in his approach to dream life. I won't trace this intervention in detail. I know you know it well, Deborah. But suffice to say, for Fanon, dreams are important because they manifest our relationship to the socius, revealing the ways that we are tethered to the world, for better or for worse. Dreams have a proper time and a proper place, he insisted. Like our pathologies and our neuroses, dreams grow out of the soil of our specific socio-historical situations. And in some circumstances, Fanon insisted, the socius is more important than the individual. In following Fanon's tracks, I hope we haven't parted ways, Britzman. This sentiment certainly marks one of the great fault lines in psychosocial studies. As we attempt to face our conflicts and our wounds, how do we decide what belongs to the self and what belongs to the social? And how does this decision guide our approach in trying to heal these wounds? Or, as the South African analyst Pumla Godobo-Madikizela says, how can we account for the mutually reinforcing problems and tensions of histories of trauma, of traumatic histories, and the force of their transgenerational impacts? This is surely one of the urgent questions of our time. How does the transgenerational transmission of trauma shape individuals, group psychology, and the very structures of our society? This daunting question will require something of each of us. For my part, I've come to believe that if, and this is a very big if, if we decide to forge a new reparative humanism, one which returns the human to its proper place as but one life among many, dreams will be one of our most crucial tools. Britzman, I know that your approach to the dream stays with the clinical encounter of associating to the self as dream work in an attempt to transform the personal. And here you're following in the tracks laid down by the French analyst J.B. Pontelly, for whom dreaming is above all an attempt to maintain an impossible union with the mother, and to preserve an undivided whole, to move in a space prior to time. I'm not convinced impossible is a word that belongs to the dream world. I want to tell you about Iris, a 9-year-old who lives in Hackney with her family. I met Iris when her mother answered a call that I put out to Londoners to share how COVID had affected their dream life. When we interviewed Iris's mother on Zoom in February of 2021, Iris came bounding down the stairs to tell us about her dreams. Like Hannah and Casey's son, she interrupted our research protocol.
One of my dreams was that, like, for some reason, me and Mum, we have to go and we have to have some surgery so I could go back in the room for some reason. And I was back in the room.
In my room?
Yeah, and it was so weird. And I was a child, but I was tiny.
But you had to go back inside Mummy.
Yeah, I had to go back inside you because it was really.
Did that be about lockdown then?
Yeah, I feel because I was in there. It was about lockdown because you have to go back. You have to go back into it in for the second lockdown. You have to go back into it. Or the third lockdown.
Yeah.
And I remember it actually got repeated many times. I got put back in. They pulled my head.
Oh, you pulled your head.
They pulled my head out, and then I just whoop. And it came out it was all suddenly really bright, everything was really bright around. And
Was it nice? Were you happy when you came out? Or was it sad?
I couldn't tell. I feel it was normal. A lot of people had it, and it felt like that. I was given right to have it. Like it's British treatment that seemed like normal, like the flu vaccine, but like it seemed normal. Like everyone had to do it at some point.
But I mean, was it comfortable inside there? Because obviously,
In the dream, the whole time I was like had the same figure, but I was tiny. I was like that big.
so you weren't a baby.
I wasn't a baby. I was a
You
child.
just got shrunk.
Yeah, I was like shrunk when I was
The
like
same proportions as a child.
yeah, same proportions as a child.
Okay.
It was really weird, and I remember at the end of the dream, at one point, like I just did a loop for the final one. I was like, ooh. I was like the loop, like just my head moved me down, and like what?
Out of the vagina.
They just put me in, and then just took me through my mouth again.
To my ears, Iris's dream is not an attempt to maintain an impossible union with the mother. The dream is an instantiation of that union. I cannot be me without you, the dream seems to say. In the dream world, we're never alone. The self is not a closed-off, individualized thing. I think you're right that dreaming may be fundamentally maternal, a return to that space that is prior to time, in utero, when our connections to our kin are most profoundly felt. The deep waters of the dream carries us there, and waking from the dream becomes akin to an act of surfacing, as David's paper so beautifully articulated yesterday. And with this surfacing comes a question. What do we do with our dreams? What use do we make of these visions? Iris teaches us that one of the things that we must do is translate them into words. We feel compelled to share them with others, and this relatively simple gesture can set off a profound and far-reaching metamorphosis, a transformation that allows us not only to reconstitute ourselves and our forms of relationality — we just witnessed how a mother and daughter's bond is enlivened by the telling of a dream — but these visions also provide the means to reshape the worlds that we collectively inhabit. What we do with our dreams is the leap, Fanon would say, that introduces invention into existence. One of my favorite examples of this world-making capacity comes from Kavita. Kavita was another one of the Londoners that my research team spoke to who wanted to share how COVID had shaped her dream life. When we asked if she had a dream from the past year that she'd like to share with us, she paused for a moment and looked up, as if calling back the images from the heavens, or perhaps re-immersing herself in the dream's waters.
So yeah, I had a dream, which I really remember really, really well. Basically, in the dream, it's like I'm not in the dream, I'm basically the observer in my dream. So I'm almost like hovering, like almost like a bird's eye view. And I'm in a church. It's a really beautiful church, really, really beautiful church. And in front of me, I'm seeing a few people coming into the church. It seems like it's basically a ceremony for someone's funeral. And basically the body is right at the front of the church in a coffin. And this gentleman is of Black origin. And he's basically like, I know in the dream that this person has been very well respected, and people are really devastated that he has passed away. And he's in this coffin and people are coming in and showing their respects, and I'm just noticing that I'm hovering over and watching people coming in and out. And then I step out of this church. As I step out of this church, I enter this amazing, beautiful park. Like, it's in London. I'm aware that it's in London. It almost reminds me of Regent's Park. Not sure if it is, but it's really beautiful. It's amazing. I come out, and on my left, I see these beautiful trees, and I see people having picnics, sitting outside. It's just so beautiful. The weather is absolutely amazing. And on my right, I see it's like a gate, but there's it's almost like a mini graveyard, but not graveyard. It's got basically almost like a remembrance kind of, they're paying respect to people that have passed away. And I'm going through them and I'm watching, seeing who is there. I notice someone from my own religion, which is Hindu, and I see a God that I actually, believe in. And I see God might pay my respect and I think, wow, this is amazing. Like I've managed to get some blessings here. Then I walk on and I see Princess Diana's, I see her sort of, it's almost like she's kind of there in the picture. The picture seems so alive, like she's smiling in the picture, but it's almost like she's smiling at me. And I just stand there and I think, wow, like how amazing is this? Like I've managed to, because she's just, I'm just like, wow, blown away. Then I keep walking on and I see a few others. I can't remember though who they were. But I'm literally just strolling through this park. And basically I come across a bench and I see a small little cute dog. It's really like cute, it's playing around, and I basically see Princess Diana sitting on a bench and she's just playing with the dog and I'm just watching her. She can't see me, but I'm just basically watching her and she's just so happy. She just seems so happy. But yeah, and then I wake up. But yeah.
Kavita could not remember exactly when she dreamed this dream, but it was sometime in 2020, a year that was dominated by the pandemic, of course, but a year that was also profoundly marked by spectacular racial violence, including the murder of George Floyd. And given the dream's proximity to these events, it's hard not to think of it as a dialogue with news headlines. But what kind of dialogue? Kavita's dream does not exactly bear witness to a violent death. Instead, she attends a funeral, hovering above the scene as people pay their respects to the Black man who's laid out in a beautiful church. Indeed, the dream stages a series of mourning scenes, scenes of grieving, scenes of remembrance, scenes of commemoration. In a year of spectacular loss, Kavita's dream performs the common rituals of mourning that we use to render lives grievable. One way to pose the question of who we are, who gets to be considered human, is by asking who lives are mourned, and conversely, whose lives are considered ungrievable. Judith Butler's argued that this emotional situation can be understood as a political optic. She says we can see the division of the globe into grievable and ungrievable lives. If the value of human life is defined by grievability, then public mourning for lives that have been deemed politically ungrievable can potentially disrupt the social hierarchy. And Kavita's dream seems to obliquely index two of the more famous examples of this political struggle: the public outrage that was directed at Queen Elizabeth when she initially refused to properly acknowledge Diana's death, and the global outrage that ensued after George Floyd was suffocated under the knee of a police officer in Minneapolis. Now, Britzman, I think you're shaking your finger at me, telling me that I've strayed too far into the socius. Can we agree, at least, that Kavita's dream directly references the political realities of our racialized social hierarchy? And by sharing it, this luminous young woman allows the vision to become something more than a private act of mourning. When the dream is transposed into words and offered up as public testimony, it becomes an act of reparation. These scenes of grief and commemoration function as a kind of visual announcement. These lives matter. I think the power of this vision is hard to overestimate. State-sponsored violence ruptures the skin of the social body, unraveling the integrity of our cherished ideals, including the ideal of a common humanity. And to my mind, Kavita's testimony shows how dreams can restore these breaches, repairing the injuries done to the social fabric by providing a bower of new images, new pathways of feeling, and new patterns of relatedness. They never cease to amaze me, these strange, elemental visions. They have so much to teach us about how to see the world differently. They provide glimpses of transformed realities that we've yet to collectively imagine. Well, this long letter is all to say thank you, Deborah. I'm grateful to your body of work, for your lifelong commitment to the question of humane... I'm a crier too. To the quest for humane learning, it is not an exaggeration to say that your sustained attention to the ways that a life world can be attended to and how, when it is met with care, has made my own journey possible. I cannot be me without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And can I invite Claudia and Sarah and Sharon to come and take the hot seats for question time? Okay, what do people think? Oh, we've got a question. Who- Oh. Yeah, Aziz.
That's right, it's still a
Thank you. Thank you for those wonderful presentations. And I hope, since I haven't asked any questions so far, that it would be okay that I ask two. I hope. I don't want to take over, but I haven't asked anything yet. Okay. Okay. All right. And Claudia, this question is not meant to put you on the spot, but I wonder, I hope it doesn't, but it's something that interests me, and hopefully I think it might interest you. I'm not sure if you're familiar with these groups, but I'm going to throw them at you. The Voluntary Mass Extinction Movement, VEHEMENT, is the acronym, and it goes by vehement, where their idea is to stop procreating to eventually, by choice, not the state doesn't get involved, by people actively choosing not to procreate so that the earth can once again reflourish without humans. That's one group. I'm thinking of another one called the Church of Euthanasia that used to, in the 1990s, they were started out in Boston, really do a lot of activism work in the Dada kind of style, and do working protests against kind of the pro-life movement. So there's that group that's interested me. And also there's a few antinatalist philosophers, including someone named Pat Benatar, and they've got a journal called the Journal of Controversial Ideas. So there's those groups that interest me that I actually have been writing about somewhat lately. But then you have a group that maybe other people know more about, which is the Extinction Rebellion, which in some sense, the Extinction Rebellion is working at different odds as the other groups because they don't want to die. And so they're, throwing paint on, expensive artworks, and they get noticed for that. So I was just wondering if you have a response to these different groups in some sense and their activities, in light of what you've been writing about and what you've been thinking about. Because I know I'm writing about some of the same things, and I'm thinking about these groups and what they're doing and what their thoughts are on what's going on the planet. And so that's for Claudia. And for Sarah, thank you so much for that work also. When I was doing my PhD at UBC, the Fukushima nuclear disaster happened, and I ended up writing my dissertation largely on that. And then I interviewed for a job at Penn State at the Harrisburg campus, which is across the street from 3 Mile Island. And my windows of my office looked out at the coolant towers there. And about 5 years, and I was involved with some of the anti-nuclear activist groups there to a certain extent, putting together some of the big conferences on the 3 Mile Island anniversaries. And so about 5 years ago, they finally shut down one of the other plants that didn't have the partial meltdown. And I was just relieved every day to not have to see the coolant towers as I was driving up as a reminder of that place. Well, just not that long ago, a few months ago, Bill Gates now has bought the plant that was decommissioned to now fuel AI. And so now these plants are being used because there's a lot of energy that needs to be used for AI. And I'm really glad that I'm no longer at Penn State for a lot of reasons, but that's one of them. And I'm away from sort of the institutions of these big institutions of education. And really, it's not so much of a question, but you're talking about like this you use, I think, the word boundless in some of your work. And I was thinking about the radioactive idea. It doesn't know, nation states. It goes beyond boundaries. And you were talking about Trinity. And we still have this glass material called trinitite, which comes from Trinity, and you can still find it in very small places like on the top of anthill mounds. And I was thinking about these anthill mounds on a very microscopic level. We have these mounds, but then you go to Fukushima and you have all of these big black plastic bags of radioactive waste. And this idea you can't escape. I was at a conference at SFU in Vancouver right after Fukushima happened, and there was a man there that said his whole family moved away from Chernobyl to get as far away as possible. And here they were living in Vancouver, and they were very anxious about what happened because of the way that the winds moved. They were going toward actually Canada, and there was a lot of there was a tick up of radioactive, I don't know, whatever you want to call it at that time. And so it's not a question so much as I'm really excited and enthusiastic to know that you're doing this kind of work. And I just kind of want to thank you for that. And I want to just hear your reactions if you have anything that I've said. Thank you. Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, Claudia.
Those are really big questions. Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to reserve the question on the first three because I don't know that much about them, and I'd love to read your work on them. And I think I need to know more before I think it through. In terms of the last one, the Extinction Rebellion group, I have heard of them, and they're very aggressive and very forceful. And yeah, I don't know. I can understand the senses of urgency and where that aggressiveness is coming from, right out of that sense of despair and urgency. And at the same time, I'm wondering how in touch with their aggressiveness they are, right? So yeah, thinking about it, no definitive answers. My own inclination, of course, is always for nonviolence.
It's Hannah, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to read your work. Maybe we can have a conversation afterwards, which would be nice. Two things. First of all, when I talk to people about this project, they're always excited. And I was excited, and I've begun to be suspicious about what that excitement is. I think it's the meltdown. So I really want to try to understand that. And I see that a lot in the writing about whether you're talking about the atomic project, and I use that word atomic specifically to refer to the Trinity project and the aftermaths and infrastructures of that investigation and those experiments, and then the larger project of nuclear technologies, which is very big, that many people have written about using a lot of different terms like nuclear unconscious, nuclear criticism, nuclear colonialism, right? So, and then the other thing is AI. I have another project that is interested in teachers' reactions to AI in the classroom. So again, I think my orientation to the question is to ask, like, what is the work of the question? And to try to understand, like, what is the hidden history that comes before, right? That gets at the timeline of, because I kind of refuse these distinctions of thinking about, because I'm a scholar of war, like, I don't want to, when somebody talks to me about new modern warfare, I'm very suspicious. So I don't know if that's an answer.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for these three astounding papers. And there's been so much discussion about AI. I just want to come back to that. And particularly because each of these presentations have used images, still images and moving image. But for Claudia, I'm particularly interested in the question of AI and whether or not you see AI as a provocation of education or a acceleration of extinction in a particular kind of way. And it's already been noted that AI has already accelerated a kind of uptake in the use of energy, both energy in the environmental world, but also a lot of human energy. So maybe you can say a bit more about your coming to AI around this question of the psychosocial transformation. And maybe the other panelists might think about this in relationship to their own engagement with this question with the use of images.
Yeah, I'm aware of the dangers and the troubles of AI and how every time that you use it, it's using up vast amounts of energy. And then now they're trying to create more nuclear plants to accommodate more use of AI. And I'm aware of my complicity. And I wrote a paper with Diane Conrad about the tar sands in Alberta and how I benefit from those. And I have no answers. I'm aware, as I was doing these images, I was thinking, okay, only this many images. And I don't know if I should continue using these images. But yeah, I'm aware. I need to think it through more. I'm also aware of recently learning about the dangers of MacBooks and iPhones and how their production, I think it's taking place in China. And basically the people who are involved in building them are basically held captive. And they work in this area which they have nets for people who are falling off, who are trying to commit suicide. And so that they won't commit suicide, they'll just jump off and the nets will catch them. And they can continue to be exploited. I mean, horrific, oppressive situations in which we're all engaged.
I was just going to share a story. I hate to cite Malcolm Gladwell, but but I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah, he had this hilarious story about AI where he was amused by it because he's constantly asking AI questions and AI is always getting it wrong. So I think he asked AI something like, how many times has a Japanese person won the marathon at the Olympics? And the actual answer is 1, but the AI came back 7. So he said, oh, really? Well, who was that? And then the AI just made up 7 names. It was quite spectacular, yeah. But I mean, it was interesting to see the images that you had produced, presumably in some relationship between the text of the dream. And it goes back, I mean, Freud writes quite beautifully about the word presentation and the thing presentation as being a fundamental kind of distinction that comes as we think about the dream. And it's, in that sense, it's interesting to me as a visual, I mean, in my other life, I'm a visual scholar, about how we're using text now to generate image, which seems like a kind of a reversal of the way in which we exist as humans insofar as we dream and then we are come to language. But I'm always disappointed by what AI does when you give it textual prompts in terms of making an image. And it felt, with respect, it felt to me like our mind could make an image if you gave us the narrative of the dream, Like our minds are good at making images, better than the AI is. So I hate the substitutive quality of interpretation where it's like, this means that, like that's the hermeneutics of suspicion, the old way of thinking about how dreams are. And it's quite clunky to do that. That's the colonizing tradition. Like, you don't know what it is. What if the boy was actually, or the woman, whatever, the kid was actually just dreaming about a snake as a snake? Like sometimes a white rifle is just a rifle, Fanon says,
The other problem with AI when I was practicing it, using it, right? And I had actually a colleague helped me a little bit on it, one of them, which isn't on here, but is that, I would type in girl on a precipice holding a hoop for the lion to jump through. And the girl was always white. So issues along those lines as well.
Warren, were you asking about the images in particular, or?
Well, I was trying to think about AI and loneliness.
Right.
So this is,
Okay.
is AI about relationality or is it about loneliness?
Well, I mean, I was wondering if that's what you were getting at, because I was thinking about the ways in which digital platforms produce intimacies, and the kinds of cultural engagements they allow and disallow. I found that kind of a more open-ended way of imagining what our engagements with these digital platforms, such as machine learning and artificial intelligence, like what do they create? What do they enable? Like they enable terrible things, like the uses of artificial intelligence in determining drone strikes, for example, and debates in international humanitarian law. But then there's other ways in which people are approaching the relationship to the digital world that creates opportunities for different kinds of intimacies, like sex work. So images, it's such a huge question, but I was interested in your kind of suggestion that pairing loneliness with the AI image, like, is there something about the AI image that feels different? Because I certainly encounter them that way.
Okay. I have a question about dreaming for you, Sharon. And I hope I'll end on a question mark. So I was, I'm not sure if I'm thinking of Beyond or Ogden or both, but thinking about how there's a slippery place where the difference between dreaming and waking is not evident, and that's where you might be most at risk of falling into madness. And I'm also thinking of that other quote, who is the dreamer who dreams the dream? And so I'm wondering, in your work with people during lockdown, was there, I'm just wondering what you can say about how their like sense of centeredness when it came to like recognizing what, like whether you're awake or not, how that figured into things.
Yeah, it's beyond who says, we are dreaming whether we are awake or asleep. Yeah, I think it's not a great version of, that's a paraphrase. But yeah, I mean, as adults, we have a hard time being in touch with our dreaming state when we're awake. Children are much better at it, I think, on the whole. My impression when we spoke to people, to Londoners, was that they were very clear about that distinction. And they all, they sort of understood we were asking them about their nighttime dreams. I'm just starting a new project. Noel was here yesterday with Noel Glover, who's a former student also of Britzman's, and mine as well. Yes, we're sharing students now. Who now works at a safe injection site here in Toronto. And so we just started a new project called Dreamers of the 21st Century, and we're trying to create a kind of map of what people are dreaming about. And we're working community by community. And so we're starting, it's based on August Saunders' a beautiful photographic project called Citizens of the 20th Century. Anyway, so we're starting sort of where Zonder ended, which is what a category he called the last people. He categorized people by social condition. And so, we're working with so-called marginalized groups, and Noel's community are people who use his site to inject drugs. And so it's interesting, even for this community, they have a very strong sense of the difference between being on the nod and the hallucinations that happen while they're high and the dreams that they have when they're asleep. I found it's quite fascinating to me. They're very strong distinction for them. But I don't know. I mean, tell me what you're hallucinating about now, because where your mind went as we talked.
I think we're going to take one last question from Cynthia.
Oh, thank you. Maybe to kind of socialize my question a little bit for Sharon. So I always tell my student I'm a failed critical scholar because I read for love rather than paranoid or critical reading. But I'm worrying that my question now is actually informed by a kind of paranoia or a hermeneutics of suspicion, because I'm kind of interested in the reading or I'm really compelled by the notion that you talked about, that dreams are a crucial tool, that dreams can provide new patterns of relationality. And at the same time, I was wondering, can we distinguish between dreams that imagines new patterns of relationality versus dreams of an already existing innocence? So the kind of notion of, we are past these racial conflicts that get played out in the last dream, or that kind of animate the last dream, if I understand you correctly, and that the dream, does it matter to distinguish between whether this is about imagining new and transformed relationalities versus dreams for innocence? Does that question make sense to you at all? Is it relevant? Is it not relevant to distinguish that? Does it make a difference, to think about transformed relations or dreaming about transformed relations versus dreaming about innocence? What Tuck and Young refer to as moves to innocence that white folks and many other folks are quite prone to.
That's a big question. If you Klein's patients have a lot of dreams. There's a very famous dream actually that Jean Walton writes about. She has a really strong reading of Klein and the ways in which, and Marie Bonaparte too, that her patients are dreaming all the time these white women are dreaming about being raped by black men and then turning them in, presumably for them to be lynched. And, this goes unremarked in the psychoanalytic literature, which is kind of spectacular in a way. It's that, yes, fair. It has gone unremarked until the last 5 years, yes. Fair enough, yeah. I don't think, this is a strong claim, and I'm hesitant to say so. I don't think dreams, come at this another way. Robert J. Lifton's work, he did an amazing book with the Nazi doctors. And he found that the one place where people express guilt is in their dreams. Both in the Einsatzgruppe, the ones that didn't completely psychologically decompose, but also the doctors. He has a long account of a case with Dr. D, who was responsible for administering the Zyklon B. And, he became perilously close to admitting guilt so far as he actually said aloud, I have to stop talking now because my lawyers I'm going to be convicted. Most of the doctors, of course, just passed into German society and back into private practice. So I don't know, maybe it's a bit of an idealized, Britzman would say it's an idealization, but I do think that dreams will pull us to, I don't think there's going to be a dream where you kind of, I'm not worried about that. About this, I don't think there's going to be an innocence that the dreams will sort of resolve us of our conflicts. I think they pull us to work through them, to face them. I mean, to think about that so few Nazis admitted their guilt, but the closest they came was through a dream. That's, to me, quite powerful.
Wow, what a conversation. Please join me in thanking Claudia, Sarah, and Sharon.